All right, Maria, welcome to True Hope Cast. Thank you so much for being with me today. How are you? What is going well?
Well, thank you so much, Simon. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the audience who's listening and giving us this time, whether they're unloading the dishwasher. A lot of times I'm doing stuff around the house when I listen or driving. Appreciate the time they're giving us. So I'm doing well. It's a fall day, a little warmer than we had hoped to be in fall, but still a beautiful day. So grateful for that.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Well, why don't you just give us an introduction about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So my name is Maria Mays, obviously, and my background is actually in the technology industry, but I am now a founder of a well-being company. So I'm a well-being coach as well as a teacher. And I'm on a mission with my business, which is called Take Five, to help others take their power back from anxiety. So I do that by offering a variety of services with the intention of kind of meeting the folks where they're at on their journey. So I have workplace relaxation videos called Take Five Stretch and Breath Breaks, designed to help you step out of the uh, stress of your workday to just ground, reconnect with your breath, and come back more focused. And then I have some online courses and I do private instruction for both businesses and individuals. And then also do one on one coaching for those who are at a point where they're ready to really make a transformation in their life. So,
Cool. When people connect with you, are there any similarities or like wild differences in regards to where people are at with their anxiety? Because I'm just presuming, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when people come and see you to start, really assessing these things and start putting things into their life to, take their power back from anxiety, must be a tricky, very different thing for a lot of people, and they've probably gone through conventional means and now they're looking for something different because maybe things before haven't worked. So how does that kind of look with
sure.
the, like the patterns of people that come and see you?
Yeah, so most of my clients are working parents with high stress occupations and high demand caretaking lifestyles, in that they're oftentimes in that sandwich generation where you're juggling caretaking for your children and your aging parents, and then have a pretty demanding career. So when they come to me, it's not necessarily, no one comes in and says, I want to take my power back from anxiety, right? But what they will do is talk about how overwhelmed they feel with their life. In some cases, anxiety manifests itself as digestive issues. It can manifest itself as not being able to keep control of our tempers, having, rageful outbursts at our loved ones and then feeling guilty about it. In some cases, it's self-medicating with substances, trying to numb. Um, and in other cases, it's just a feeling of uneasiness and not being able to be focused or productive. So it can manifest in so many different ways. And for me, my anxiety manifested as probably all of those and then some. So it's really, as we start that process, it's just really looking to figure out how it's affecting their lives, how it's manifesting in the body and the mind, and what's going to be the fastest way to help them take their power back. So,
Really cool. Just something really came up for me when you were talking about that manifestation in the body. I feel like
mhm.
anxiety, depression, these kind of symptoms or pathologies that we kind of that we label to kind of get there with a diagnosis, they're kind of the end stages of an experience, right? So like there's obviously something happening within the body, something that's happening in the outside world that's causing this energy shift within the body. And
Mhm.
I find the body so fascinating in regards to how my personal like work stress can no, that energy has to go somewhere, right? Like if I'm not like doing daily routines in regards to managing with that stress and digesting it and doing something with it, it's certainly going to manifest and it's literally going to store up in my body because the energy kind of has to go somewhere. And depending on where we are as an individual, where we might be susceptible, that might end up in someone's digestive system. It might end up in someone's brain. It might end up in someone's like hips as pain or back pain, and
Mhm.
it's really fascinating that the body kind of does that, and the body does have these like little susceptible areas. But what we genuinely do is like we'll go to the doctor and we'll talk about like that that hip pain or that back pain or that brain pain or that digestive pain.
Mhm.
And the last thing that you would probably have a conversation with a, a conventional doctor is like, okay, what's your stress levels like? What's, how do you experience anxiety? What do you do to, help yourself out with that? What's your self-care routine? Like, do you
Sure.
actually take care of that energy? Because we all feel that stress and everything like that. So I love that you're talking about that manifestation in the body. And
Mhm.
my follow-up question, I think, is going to be, what do you how do you approach the idea of talking to somebody who might not be aware of like the mind body connection, or like what holistic medicine is, or functional
Yeah.
medicine? How do you bring that to the table? Because we're so like conventionally um driven in regards to, I've got this pain, I go to the doctor and I get this pill, and it's like rooted in like one area of my body, and that's like the specialty. Like, how do you help people like
Mhm.
open up their idea away from that like reductionist pathway?
Yeah. So, um, I leverage a lot of somatics for that. So what happens, and I'll kind of expand a little bit, but what happens when we are in a chronically anxious state, or even in a chronic stress state, right, is we end up being also caught in the sympathetic nervous system, right? Caught in that mobilization, that go, 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 that fight or flight, where we're not even able to really get present enough and self-aware enough to realize how we're feeling. So a lot of times if I'm working with someone who's maybe really in the depths of it, and maybe oftentimes I'll get referrals from, they're working with a therapist, or in some cases they're on pharmaceuticals or not on pharmaceuticals, or at different points in their journey, right? And with someone who's in the thick of it, oftentimes if I say, well, how does that feel in your body? Where do you feel the anxiety in the body? They can't answer, because, and I understand, because, my own journey with anxiety was a long one and an ongoing one. But we tend to kind of dissociate, right? And so part of the process to get them opening up their awareness to more possibilities is using the breath. And so I am a firm believer that the breath is probably the most powerful and underestimated tool that we have. And so we get so caught up in our thinking minds that initially, when I ask you, well, where do you feel the anxiety in your body? You're going to be thinking about it, right? And so if I ask you to just take a few breaths with me, and if we slow things down and I ask you a series of just awareness questions, placing your awareness on different parts of the body, then those answers will start to arise. And then as a result of that, they'll start to make some connections in maybe what they see within their day, how it might affect them. And really that's the first part of it, is, so to really take your power back from something, you have to, one, acknowledge it exists, right? And oftentimes, I know for me, I'll just take you through a quick the timeline of my journey with anxiety. My symptoms started in early childhood, so before I entered the school system. But my diagnosis wasn't until I was in my early 30s. And it took me about 18 months to 2 years to actually accept that diagnosis. Now, I was already getting treated for it. I was on a variety of pharmaceuticals, and this is when I started to seek out alternative methods for managing my anxiety. But I wasn't in what I'll call a deep acceptance of the fact that this is something that is is going to be a lifelong journey, and is something that I really have to understand. And so, as I got in my later 30s, after that acceptance, then I really truly started to understand it, which allowed me to kind of befriend it. So it went from more of a battle with my anxiety to a little bit more of a dance then. And then as I moved into my early 40s, that's where I was able to make that pivot through that understanding, and then having cultivated a lifestyle focused on managing my anxiety and leveraging a lot of schools that or skills that I had schooled myself in. That's how I was able to take back my power. But it took me quite some time to accept that. So I think that first step for us is just acknowledgement. And a lot of times we can't get that if we're not self aware. So for me, I wasn't self aware enough at the time to even really understand and feel how it was manifesting in my body. I didn't make the correlation that my digestive issues were a result of it, or that, my outburst at my family, or the different things I'd experienced. And so I would just say that as we use the breath to start to open up and become more self-aware, that's where the power lies and begins. In that, then once you have that awareness, then with curiosity, you can go and just kind of explore and start to really understand it and appreciate, how it has maybe protected you at times. At least it thought it was, right? I mean, there's all these things that our bodies try to tell us. Oftentimes, if we're disassociated with the mind-body connection, it falls on deaf ears, if you will. So,
Yeah, I think that that acceptance piece and that self-awareness is very, very important, because I think that we go through massive chunks of our lives where we do experience like anxiety, stress, and maybe for some people like an actual disease that
mhm.
needs care. We 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 kind of live through a lot of that subconsciously, and our mind and our body aren't really connected in regards to like what's going on. Like we may even like
Mhm.
biochemically change ourselves with drugs, which is actually physically changing what's going on within the body, and we might not be able to even make those connections. And then also, like as you were talking about, like as a self defense mechanism, the body does this on a short-term basis very, very well, but it's supposed to like recalibrate and not live in a sympathetic stressful state for a long period of time. But people
Mhm.
learn to, or not learn to, but they end up living kind of constantly in this like low grade stressful
Huh.
environment where they're not going to be super connected to their bodies, because they're kind of just all up here just pumping out
Mhm.
adrenaline and being like,
Cortisol, and yeah.
yeah, just being acutely aware of like their like narrow-minded vision, because the body is technically putting them in a situation to run away from a predator. So being able to actually like connect with the body is very, very difficult. And then when you're talking about breath, which I completely agree with you, is one of the most powerful and one of the quickest ways that you can completely reset your nervous system. You actually if you start having to think about your breath and having your hand like on your belly and making sure you're kind of doing it well, you're immediately like engaging in your nervous system, because when we just breathe most of the time, it's going for us, it's automatic. But
Mhm.
once we can actually start taking some good deep quality breaths, we're immediately making this like vagus nerve connection, and we can
Mhm.
start like reconnecting back with the body, and maybe like relearning and checking in, like where is my pain and how is it, and like really start, and then start dealing with that energy buildup that we were talking about. So
Mhm.
I love that we're talking about that mind body connection and that acceptance piece, because yeah, there will be, you just say you took a couple of years to rebuild on maybe like nearly 2 decades worth of habits and acceptance and mind thought. And so many people do that. They go through such a long period of time like bound to the personality of their like dis-ease, and that's kind
Yeah.
of like who they are. And then to have like an enlightened moment to kind of challenge that narrative, to
Mhm.
challenge that like connection that you have in your brain of like, I am this personality that lives with this disease, that's part of me, it's who I am. If you
Mhm.
challenge that, it's quite tricky and scary, because then you're stepping into the unknown, right? You're stepping into the unfamiliar. But that's a really beautiful place to obviously cultivate change, and
Mhm.
and to go through these different things. So what other like simple techniques do you kind of incorporate? You mentioned the breath. If you want to go further into the breath work, because there's many different techniques in regards to breath work for like beginners and advanced people, and like whether you
Sure.
want to do something. So maybe you could tell us about some of those smaller techniques.
Yeah, for sure.
Simpler techniques, sorry.
Sure. So yeah, we'll start with the breath. So um I all of my work incorporates breath work because it's has so much power. So what we were talking about earlier with, when you're caught in this and conditioned, right? So at least for me, I found myself, as a working mom, taking care of my kids, taking care of my dad, my parents, with some chronic health conditions, juggling a full time career, doing all this stuff. And just most of us, I believe, in this Western world are on this trajectory of, you get good grades, you go to college, keep your credit score high, you buy a house, you get a career, you do all this stuff, right? And so what happens is we get caught in that hamster wheel of productivity, do more, do more, do more. And when we are in that constant go mobilization, work emails being in here, social media is being in here, this is going on in the news. It's that chaos and that noise keeps us in that sympathetic state. And when we're in that sympathetic state, as you know, things that are not important, like our digestion, like our all those things are throttled back, right? And our heart rate increases. And what happens to your breath is, if you think about the last time you were in a state of just real stress or anxiety or panic, or let's say for me, it would be a snake. If a snake came rolling in here, I would immediately go like that. So what happens is your breath becomes high in the chest, and we get caught in that short, high breath cycle, which means we're not taking as much oxygen in to nourish all the cells in the body. And we're probably not releasing as much waste product, of carbon dioxide leaving the body. And so that has effects over time, right? And so one of the easiest tips you can do is just notice your breath, right? And maybe I oftentimes have someone place a hand on the belly and a hand on the chest. And as you breathe, just noticing where you feel the breath. And by deepening it, and by deepening, I mean just mindfully as you inhale, visualize it going deeper into the body. And as you lengthen it, so as we lengthen the breath, specifically in lengthening the exhales, we can help ourselves drop into that parasympathetic nervous system. So the best way to maybe do this is maybe just take you and the viewers through just a few moments of relaxation, if you'd like that.
I'd love that.
Okay, so let's just start with just noticing how we're feeling in the body in this moment. And so if you're driving, keep your eyes open. If you're not and can close your eyes, you're welcome to close your eyes if that feels safe and comfortable to you. But if your eyes are open, just take a yawn. Because what's going to happen when you yawn is it's going to help those eyes soften a little bit with the gaze. And we're just going to notice just how we're feeling in the body. And I want you to bring your awareness to your shoulders. And just notice the weight that you might be carrying there. Let's just release a little bit of that. So we're just going to mindfully, as we inhale, draw those shoulders up towards the ears. And as we exhale, just allow them to soften back down. Let's do that 2 more times. So just like a turtle going in, taking his head in the shell, inhaling, shoulders come up. Exhaling, shoulders release back down. 1 more like that. Let's just inhale in all that oxygen. And as we exhale, just release the weight that you might be carrying there. We'll just take a few more breaths together, just looking to deepen the breath. So inhaling for 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, inhaling 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhaling 2, 3, 4, 5. And I just want you to notice now. Just notice that breath. Notice how you're feeling, and just notice if anything shifted.
I certainly feel lighter.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So a lot of times, we carry a lot of weight on our shoulders, energetic weight, the weight of all the responsibilities, all the to-dos, all the worries, all the ruminations of the past, all that a lot of times exists I find a lot in the neck and the shoulders. For those of us who do a lot of desk work, there's a lot of chronic tension there. And I believe it's another manifestation of anxiety as well. And so what oftentimes I'll do is take people through 5 minutes of a relaxation like that, or release the neck, release the shoulders, and then after, just notice how we can come back with more mental clarity, more focus, and just lightness, right? And so that's one way you can change your state, right? And so I just encourage your listeners, to just start to play with this a little bit. Maybe you've never thought about doing deeper breath cycles before. Just take 5 slower than normal, deeper than normal breaths. It can really change not only your presence from basically looking at maybe the external circumstances that are causing you stress, and taking that presence inward, but it can also then help you change kind of a mindless response into a more mindful reaction. So it's really important too, when we transition from work to home and home to work and all these different roles, these different hats that we put on. Anytime you transition, maybe just think, oh, let me see if I can take a few breaths here before I transition.
When you start introducing breath work as as a new skill set that people can start using, do you experience that it can be a challenge for a lot of people? Because I think if we don't actually take the time to be conscious of our breath, then just like if we don't, exercise or move our bodies, we have primary and secondary, muscles of
Mhm.
breathing, right? So they need to be strong, they need to be toned, they need to be functional. So I suppose for a lot of people who, don't, maybe consciously work on their breath, let's say consistently, they're not going to have like the tone or even like the physical ability at the beginning to even like breathe, let's say, properly. So that, do you find that's a challenge for some people when they start?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes when I'm starting to see a client, what we'll notice is some breathing dysfunctions. So sometimes that can be that high, short breath. So one of the things that I work with people on is kind of diaphragmatic training to help them take that breath deeper into the belly. Um, and there's a lot, when you're starting out, and if you're really in a high anxiety state, there's certain breathing exercises we wouldn't do. There are things, so just as kind of a rule of thumb, as you lengthen the inhale, that's a more energizing breath, taking us into the sympathetic system, slightly, very slightly increasing your heart rate when you inhale. As you lengthen the exhale, that takes us back into that more relaxed state. And so, if someone's coming in and they're at a high sense of agitation, we're not going to do any work where we just notice the breath, really, other than just notice it quickly and move on. But we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at awareness there, because we need to work on moving some of that frenetic energy through and out of the body first, which is why part of the way I approach, whether it be a meditation teaching, whether it be any of the things that I do, is first just releasing some neck and shoulder tension and sometimes some low back tension, because I believe we are containers, right? These vessels that we have, these containers of energy, if we don't allow that to release, we're not going to allow ourselves to get into that relaxed state. So what I found in aiming to develop a meditation practice personally is I was challenged for many a year because I physically couldn't get my body to be comfortable enough to be still. And I think that's a big disservice that I think a lot of the, not an intentional disservice, but I think a lot of the structured teachings, there's a perception out there that you have to be, still and in a very particular posture with a specific
I know what
body
you mean. Yeah.
posture in order to get into the benefits of meditation. And the reality is that when our body is making movements as we try to meditate, it might be a sign that we need to do some release work prior to, right? Which is part of what I do. But also to have the freedom to really get comfortable by using pillows and by using benches and different things to get the body in a state where, if you've got a couple herniations like I have, that you can be restful. And then also having the compassion and self-awareness to know that that is stress's way of leaving the body. When you're trying to get quiet and still and the body is a little bit of fidgeting, then just allow it. You can notice it, just like the thoughts come in, notice it, and then allow them to release, because it's just stress leaving the body. And so it's got to get out somehow.
Yeah, whenever I experienced that when I first started to meditate, where sitting still, and I always felt like it was my mind trying to tell my body to move. Like
Mm.
my mind's like so not used to being still and kind of like inactive. Obviously it's never inactive, but like not stimulated.
Hmm.
My brain would like tell like make my hand itchy, or like try and throw something in my mind that I needed to take care of immediately. But
Hmm.
like then you've got like your conscious mind is like trying to tell your like kind of reptilian brain, I suppose, that wants you to get up and get moving. It's like it's kind of like teaching a dog to like stay. So
Hmm.
I remember one of my practitioners um, would teach me like that. Like you'd be sit there, you'd sit still, or even I think a more advanced meditation technique is to do like walking meditations, which are some of my
Hmm.
favorite ones, because you can really get conscious with the breath there, and it's really you can
Hmm.
feel your body moving and changing as you do that. I wouldn't recommend to just jump into walking meditations if you've never done meditation before, but it's certainly a fun way to do it. But yeah, it's that interesting disconnect that we have when we attempt to sit down, even for a few minutes, to just like breathe and be still. How your
Hmm.
mind will do work so hard to get you up moving again, because the mind really likes to be in control and be right there, and it's difficult for it to let go of like that body connection trying to be involved and get some attention as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we touch briefly on the vagus nerve, and I think that's a great way to segue, because as you were talking about breathing for sympathetic response as well,
Hmm.
immediately takes me to like Wim Hof breath work. It takes me to like
Sure.
when I jump in my like cold ice bath, my breath is aggressive, like because you're jumping in like 35-degree water. It's super cold, and the only way I can do it is to just like pump myself up for it. So the breath is like really powerful in regards to how it can completely engage and get your body ready for fight, but it could also completely take you down and get you ready to sleep. So it's just
For
amazing how
sure.
that works. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and like the importance of the vagus nerve, and like
Yeah.
how do you introduce that to your clients?
So we'll just start with just a quick overview of what it is, right? So the vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve, and so it connects in the base of the skull here, and then it actually wanders throughout the body, wandering, touching things like the diaphragm and our digestive organs, and that's I believe vagus is Latin for wanderer. So it's important because when we talked about that sympathetic and parasympathetic, which, I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with that, but two of the three parts of the autonomic nervous system. So our autonomic nervous system manages those things that we don't have to think about, right? Our respiration cycle, our heart rate. Our digestion, our bladder, all those different things. It's got a really important job. And so that when we are in that sympathetic, which is our mobilization, which is designed to allow us to move to action. We're in that fight or flight in some cases too, but really, I like to think of it as more mobilized state. And then the parasympathetic, of course, the rest and digest state, or in some cases, detachment, disassociation, and demobilization if you're in more of a dorsal vagal state. And so that vagus nerve has a huge job because it's basically really the key player in keeping homeostasis between those two, right? And so um, the vagus nerve is also very interesting because it has all these nerve fibers, right? 80% of the information is going from the body to the brain, 20%. So that's afferent, right? Going up to the brain, 20% going from the brain to the body, which is something that seems kind of backward. We wouldn't realize that, right? And so that's why this developing the ability to have that mind body connection, to develop neuroception and all these tools is really important because it can allow us to really pay attention and to move from a monologue where we're just telling our body what to do and not paying attention to what it's telling us, to more of a dialogue, really kind of listening to the cues. Okay, my heart rate's really high right now. What's going on? Maybe I need to take a deep breath. So that's the importance of the vagus nerve. So what they've found, especially in more recent years, with a lot of research being put toward this, is that you can increase heart rate variability, which is that variation between every heartbeat that we have, right, through increasing vagal tone. So there's a variety of exercises that you can do to do that. Some of it's through breath work. Some of it's something like, even like what we did when I said, if your eyes are open, just take a yawn. So if you yawn right now, just notice how that feels. Notice how it automatically allows you to feel a little bit more restful, right? So we're engaging the vagus nerve there. Humming, the hot and cold, like you said. There's some movements where we can go past midline with our eyes. And some specific movements known as pendulation with the body that can engage the vagus nerve too. So oftentimes when I'm working with a client, we're not going through a ton of the anatomy on it, right? But what we are doing is getting an understanding of how, when I do these different movements, I start to see a difference. And so having kind of a basic understanding of your nervous system, I think, is important. And there's tons of information out there on it to just help you with maybe we all have a why, right? So once we've acknowledged and accepted the fact that we have anxiety, let's say in my case, anxiety, there has to be a why in terms of why I'd want to pivot out of that anxiety, why I wanted to take the reins back. For me, it was my children. This is, I believe, truly a generational curse in my family. We've had so many, if I look at, my mom will talk about, oh, well, my mom used to just think of things to worry about. It was like her job. And it's like, well, that's just like you, Mom, and how we got it from. So we get caught up in these habits, like these worry loops and habits. And so for me, seeing the opportunity to, the buck stops here with me, with this generation, make sure that I can cultivate a lifestyle for my children that really is mindful of managing stress and anxiety, and cultivating a lifestyle that can turn up the genes for health and turn down the genes that are responsible for a lot of these chronic health conditions. And so I would say we start with a little bit of an overview like that, and then start with some exercises, whether it be breath work or humming or a variety of different ways to look at that vagal toning. And so, yeah, there's a lot.
That's perfect. I mean, I think, yeah, it's just amazing that we actually have this structure within our body to be able to connect with and engage in different ways that can immediately like help us completely change our mood, change our thoughts, change our emotional state, and change our behaviors. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
In regards to, like, I want to talk about kids and teens.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help like young children or teens manage their own anxiety when you've got yours? I'll give you an example with me. So like, I'm so connected in like energetically with my 3-year-old son, my eldest son. I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And whenever I am like underslept or stressed out or burnt out, I'm just like, I get agitated really, really quickly, and it's difficult for me. But he, like, it's so funny because he'll just, like, regardless of how he's feeling, he'll just like connect with me energetically and just get there like just the right way as well, like just like immediately. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we, please teach me, how do I how do I help like because I want to obviously in the moment be able to deal with situations better, and not have my body running through it with stress hormones. I want to take care of
Sure.
myself, but I also want to instill good habitual psychological behaviors in my children, right? As you were talking about how, like, your mother and your grandmother, they
Mm-hmm.
inherit genes, but they also inherit behaviors, right? So
Oh,
how
absolutely.
so how can we help so how can I help my kids, and how can we help our all of our kids help
Mm-hmm.
deal with their anxieties as we have our own?
So, a lot of the different breathing practices, for example, that I teach can be taught to children as well. But the number one thing you can do as a parent to help your children with anxiety is to get a handle on your own. And by that, I mean, we really underestimate our ability to model behavior for our children. And so I've done a lot of analysis on this just in my personal life because, you know, looking at is it nature versus nurture? So if I look at my children, for example, and they're a little bit older, my daughter actually turned 14 today and my son's 15 and a half. So I'm a little ahead of you on the parenting journey, but I can tell you, you know, when I look back at when they were young, I don't remember seeing really any, you know, tendencies for anxiety in them. That was, you know, they just not something that I remembered seeing. But what I do know occurred is that I hadn't yet taken my power back. So what was modeled for them was, for example, we're late, we got to get in the car, we got to go, we're going to be late. Okay, let's go, get buckled up, get your cheese puffs, whatever, and we're off, right? And so just that act of rushing to get somewhere, that can create, I think, a little level of anxiety, right? By your anxiety rubbing off on them. And so now it's very interesting as I watch now, as I've made this shift in my journey. And for the last, 5 years or so, been really mindful about, okay, we're going to get in the car, we're going to go. Don't worry about being late. I mean, even this morning, my daughter was stressing out about being late. And I said, what's the worst thing that can happen if you're late? Do you get a beating? I don't think they do that anymore, but maybe they do some places. But my point being is I do a lot of thinking about, okay, is that just wired in her? Which I think there's some of that. Or was that because she saw me rushing around, when she was 2 and 3, absorbing that versus what I'm doing now, much more calm approach. And so I think our ability to model for our children is really important. And so I think you're probably not giving yourself enough credit, Simon. You probably do a great job modeling that. But I would say for something that's, and I'll give you an example of how this works. So I teach breath work. I'm a breath coach. I live, eat, and breathe this, right? So obviously I'm exposing my kids to this. Well, teenagers, they don't want to, do what mom says. And so, okay, yeah, mom, I'll breathe, right? Well, a couple days ago when I was in the ER with my son, he had broken his radius and ulna. It was a beautiful thing to witness him stop the doctor before they were going to do the reset and different things and say, I just need a moment to breathe. On several different occasions, I witnessed him do that. And it was such a parenting moment for me, because here I thought that was all, in one ear, out the other, but he was listening. He was getting it. So I think also seeing me when I am in a moment of maybe some stress, taking a deep breath, that's something that they notice and then they can engage. But something that's really kind of fun for young kids is, I actually might have one on my desk here, is a pinwheel, for example. You could use a pinwheel. You can think about birthday candles or a dandelion. But the pursed lips breath, where you purse the lips like you're blowing something out, is a great way to get a more calm effect. So let's say your 3-year-old skins his knee, right? And, ow, and they're in that pain moment. A lot of times with young kids, I'll say, oh, let's blow out some birthday candles here. So just take an inhale and then blow out the candles. Or with the pinwheels, I look to see how long can they get the pinwheel to spin? Because when they're thinking of that challenge of doing it, what's happening is it's slowing down the spin by taking that slower, deeper breath cycles.
That's cool. I like that.
So yeah, so there's a lot of little tips we can incorporate. And the thing is, if we practice these things with our kids, then enough, with enough practice, then we do imprint on the nervous system, where a coherent breath, for example, where we slow the breath down to 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale. If you do that on a daily basis for, I think it's like 5 or 6 weeks, the studies say you imprint on your nervous system to where when you're in that next moment where you need it, you can go to that. So yeah, lots of techniques for breath work and building self-awareness too with kids, because they certainly don't teach that in school. I wish they did. But again, I'll just circle back to the most important thing we can do as parents is model it by really being mindful and starting to get the reins back from our own anxiety, and that'll show through the kids. So I'm living proof
Yeah.
for sure.
It's certainly a challenge. I mean, and also there's like so many schools of thought in regards to parenting, and you could spend your whole life going through the library on parenting books, and like we obviously parent somewhat how we were parented, and I think that the whole kind of like discipline, punishment idea, I think that's very, very old school. I think that's very obviously you need to discipline your children, but I think that I think a lot of, let's say, a couple of generations back didn't really see the difference between the two. And
Mhm.
I can't see really any benefit in punishing a 2, 3, 4 year old that is so new to the world. And you're talking about when you were rushing around in a particular example, you as an adult, like what it's like to be late, but you also know what it's like to have time. But in that situation, your kids are kind of understanding, oh, this is how you behave in this
Exactly.
event. And just taking a step back and realizing that these young children are so impressionable and they're so new in the world. I mean, like my son's been on the planet for 3 years. It's nothing, right? So to have that as like my forefront, and my wife and I made a very, very big decision, probably when he was around like two, like we were going to be like trying to have like the most abundance amount of patience and
Mhm.
understanding and love, even when he's just like on the rails and just like not listening and
Mhm.
not doing anything, just to try and have as much compassion and love and understanding for that. And as soon as we've done that, he's mirroring us more and more, like the outbursts and the wild teenager behaviors are just like getting reduced and reduced and reduced. And it's all because of we're controlling our own levels of anxiety and stress. And then when we are like this morning was insane, and my wife and I both underslept, and like our patience was like super thin. And then like
Mhm.
the kids act out. It's just
Oh,
so
for sure.
it's just you can just, when you see those patterns as well, like it's just okay, like I need to take care of some stuff today on my own. My wife needs to do that, and just like come back into the room, come back into the situation with a different energy. And we do have like breath work, and we do have these times. And
Yeah.
it's such an interesting dynamic when, like, as a husband, like I recognize that my wife needs that now, and the kids need that now, and I need that now. And like, it's this whole like wild organism, this family. And, anxiety and stress and all these things are very, very normal parts of biology. But it's like, um, how much do we engage with them, and how reliant are we on them? And ultimately, how strong a habit do we create our kids around that anxiety? And obviously
For sure.
we don't want anxious kids, but if we're not conscious about like what we're doing ourselves and taking care of ourselves, then it's only inevitable that we're going to have anxious teenagers and
Sure.
create anxious adults. And the last couple of years with COVID, like just goes to show that if we're not, as adults, like being role models for mental health and role models for these things, then we are just inevitably going to have like the most stressed out generation coming up. So it's so important now more than ever to have these tools, have these tips that we can just jump into like right away, anytime during our day, that we can start to like reshift our nervous systems.
For sure. And I should just mention that, that's one thing, just you hit on two things there. One is that self-awareness, right? I think that's such a key tool. And it's a skill, like any skill. It has to be honed, right? Their practice has to occur to develop that, but also the self-compassion. So when we find ourselves, oops, got a little too rushed this morning, or got a little agitated with the children. If we can meet that with compassion, modeling that self compassion, that's also going to go through to the children. And I think that's something that's really needed right now. So when I look back, I mentioned my journey started really early. Well, that was because at a very young age, I was having episodes where I would lose consciousness and seize. And so, what started anxiety in me was never knowing when I would lose consciousness and hit the floor. And so, that is what started it, right? And then there was some modeling going on, obviously. But then it was the conditioning of the world where we got into the rat race and all the stresses, where I got caught up in um, that constant cycle. And so I just want to say that because I don't want people to think, oh, is my 3-year-old, have anxiety. I would say that's probably rare to start that young. But I do think that right now, I mean, I was looking at some of the data yesterday on rates of anxiety. and where they're at today versus where they were at yesterday. And I think it was the 18 to maybe 29 was the largest uptick. And I think it was at about a 39%, or it was about 29% on average. I think the CDC data is what I was looking at. But if we look at, as parents, what we went through as we were coming of age, right? As we early childhood, adolescence, all those different experiences and the stresses of the world that we had or didn't have maybe. And then we look at what our children are experiencing now as a result of the pandemic and everything. I just really think it's so important that I'll just kind of circle back to it as parents, develop that self-awareness and develop that self-compassion, because I really don't think it's good to have the self-awareness, but if you don't meet that with self-compassion, then you're really going to never get over that edge, because the thing is, we're human. We're going to have, the minutes where we're short-tempered with our kids, or we're going to mess up. And so by saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I really screwed up. I didn't mean to lose my temper. I should have taken a breath. Let's take a breath together. I mean, that's another thing you could do with your kids, is just say, you know what, hey, I'm going to try this weird breathing technique where you make a bumblebee sound when you breathe. Do you want to try it with me? So just asking your kids to explore with you, I think is good too. But I really can't, I guess, harp on enough that self-compassion has to be a follow-up to that self-awareness, especially with parenting, because we oftentimes beat ourselves up as parents. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it'd be quite rare to have like actually like clinically anxious 3-year-old, but what we all do have is stress in our lives, whether that's conscious or
absolutely.
unconscious coming in. And it's like, but as parents, like, are we laying down the foundations for that stress to turn into anxiety or depression, or are we instilling by modeling ways in which to work with that stress and deal with that stress? And I think we have such a huge responsibility to do that. I don't think we are given enough tools and tips to do it ourselves from like the government or Health Canada or the CDC or whatever. But it's so vital that we work on ourselves, so we can model that for our children to help them be able to deal with the inevitable stresses that are going to come their way in, like all different
and
times
the
of their life.
stresses of this, right? So one thing we didn't have, your listeners, I'm holding up my cell phone. One thing we didn't have is a constant media feed, constant. I mean, it never stops. So we have to mindfully, as parents, step away from that and model for our kids, I think, stepping away from that, because then it'll be a lot easier to get the kids to step away. So I think that's just one big component that has a whole different aspect to mental health, and also its correlation to being in the sympathetic nervous system all the time. Because when you're getting an onslaught of hits with all this media, these dopamine hits, all this stuff all the time, again, we have the tendency to get caught in that mobilization. So I think just, having that awareness and that mindfulness of, what, it's different than when we grew up, and we just do our best, right, as parents. But so we have to have compassion for ourselves when we've caught ourselves on our phone too much or whatnot. But so
we have to be able to adapt as well, because that technology piece is new, right? So we have to start thinking maybe outside the box and maybe educating ourselves in regards to how do we monitor this, how do we deal with this? Because as you say, like it's something that's changing the brains and the biology of the human race, let's be honest. And those young kids and teenagers and even babies born into an energetically very depleted, changed world in 2022, it's like there's no way we can't take that into consideration as well. So that's also another piece that allows you to have a little bit of empathy and self-compassion for yourself and others, and try and hold yourself in gratitude. But Maria, that's it. That's a perfect closing point. Thank you so much for coming onto the show today and sharing such wonderful advice and experience with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And how can people connect with you?
So you can connect with me on my website, which is the number 5.health. You can also connect with me on social media, and that's at Take 5 Health, no dot there. And I have, if you subscribe, I have a service where I release stress relaxation videos, stress release, these tension relaxation videos, breathwork trainings. Once a month, I feature one. So you can get those in your inbox, as well as a variety of tools to cultivate well-being. So.
Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure that the website and your social media stuff is all in the show notes so people can take advantage of that offer, because that's awesome. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. We'll be back with you next week. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Please leave us a review on iTunes and a little 5-star on Spotify. But that is it for this week. We'll see you soon.